Well, good morning, friend. Thursday morning and the middle of the month of July, July the 15th, already halfway through this month. Seems like the month is flying by. And I hope that you've had a good service last night. We had a wonderful service here, Maranatha Baptist Church, and excited and ready for the weekend. And I'm looking forward to seeing what God can do. Middle of the month. Now, let's be careful about, I know people are going to be getting ready probably in about another week or so, taking their last fling before school gets back in session, but let's be faithful to our church services. Let's not let summertime cause us to backslide, and let's stay faithful to the Lord in these times. And I know that's what the Lord would want us to do, and I'd encourage you, if you can, to be sure to be faithful to church. I want to read to you this morning from Ezra chapter 4 and verse 24. It says, "Then ceased the work of the house of God, which is at Jerusalem. So it ceased until the second year of the reign of Darius, king of Persia." Now, some of the saddest words in the scriptures are found in this verse that I just read to you, and it says that the work of God ceased. I can only imagine how hard it was for Ezra and those with him to lay down their hammers and saws as the government officials forced them to quit building the temple of God. Now, can you imagine as they passed by the temple every day what was going through their hearts? We know from the reading of this book that Ezra had finally had enough. And when he had enough, he went back to the temple without permission from the government. However, what he lost during the time of the shutdown, he would never recover that. That time was lost forever. Didn't matter what he did. Now, I can say this because I think everybody here who's listening can understand what I'm talking about. During the COVID-19 pandemic, many churches closed down and only went to virtual services. Soul winning quit. Sunday school classes quit. The whole outreach program was shut down because of government officials who relied on a failed doctor who changed his advice so many times that if anybody else would do that on their normal time, they would be fired. The sad part about the shutdown is that the work of God ceased. You see, much of what was lost will never be recovered. You see, we have to understand that when things are shut down, God's work shuts down, there's a lot more that shuts down. Let me point out what happens when the work of God ceases. First, the work accomplished always deteriorates while the work of God has ceased. You cannot let something sit and expect it not to deteriorate without it being used. Everything is built to be used. And when it's not being used, it deteriorates. One reason you've never got to let God's work cease is because it deteriorates while it sits. You know, an empty house gradually deteriorates because God meant it to use. You put a car, just sit your car out, a good car, just let it sit there for years. Tires will rot, the engine won't work, everything gums up on the inside. Why? It's not being used. And the same thing with God's work. It will deteriorate while it ceases. Second, you can never recover the time that you ceased from God's work. Time is something that can never be recovered, my friend. What is not done while the work of God ceases can never be recovered. Third, you can never recover the souls that would have been saved during the time that you ceased God's work. There are souls that'll go to hell while we sit waiting for God's work to start up again. We must never bring back the souls saved while believers cease from God's work. Every soul that is lost while God's work ceases will burn in hell for an eternity. Think about that. Now, fourth, the potential lost while God's work has ceased will never be recovered. The potential that you were headed towards cannot be recovered because you can't regain the momentum to bring you to where you were before it stopped. Now, you may regain momentum, but you will never regain that time and where you could have been had you never shut down. Fifth, you can never recover the failed lessons that you taught the next while God's word ceased. You see, while you sit and do nothing, you're teaching the next generation that the work of God is not that important. Every excuse that to God's work being ceased is a the next generation how unimportant God's work is to you. Now, my purpose in pointing all this out to you is because many believers cease from God's work to backslide or to do other things. And while God's work is ceased in their life, you're losing in these 5 areas that I've just mentioned. You must never cease doing God's work. God's work as a priority in your life has to be that priority. Time is short, unrecoverable. Don't waste your time ceasing from God's work to do things of less importance. So you cease from God's work. Okay, for instance, a church ceases from the work of soul winning to build its buildings. You can't recover souls. A person ceases from going to get themselves out of debt. That's a danger. You can't recover that time. A person ceases from God's work to maybe do some extra work on a business that they own. You can't recover that lost time. Do you understand? We've got to always be faithful. No matter what happens, be faithful to the work of the Lord. My friend, I hope this is a help to you. Remember today, hey, be good to everybody. Everybody's having a tough time. Have a great day, my friend.